Hello and welcome to Pathways, where you are invited to join me for a visit with leaders in personal development and cultural evolution. This is your host, Paul O'Brien. We've got war, competition, oppression, the subjugation of the feminine, and an illusory principle of separation have ruled the world for the past 6,000 years or so since the dawn of agriculture. How did we get to this world where men feel compelled to dominate, to hide tenderness and compassion, to show their toughness, and to propagate war? In his new book, today's guest identifies and interprets the historical ideologies that suppress the feminine and details the impact of the Mayan culture on the present day. And he uses his personal life story and travels as a sort of a metaphysical travelogue. In these days of mass confusion fueled by fake news and fake social media, this book is described by one reviewer as a, quote, gripping account of one man's struggle with the contemporary confusion known as masculine identity. Our guest today is Eli Coberly, author of the new book, War in the Hearts of Men. Eli is a world traveler and seeker of truth through adventure. At 17, he left his small Pacific Northwest town to fulfill his dream of becoming an Army paratrooper. At 20, he was honorably discharged and began his search for a new dream. Eli's writing has taken him worldwide to explore a few of the bigger questions of our human existence, and his prophetic worldview combines military service, counterculture, and the anthropology and archeology of the world's religious symbols. He has studied the migration of the indigenous and ingested their medicine, absorbed their art, and embodied their cosmovision. A yoga therapist, Eli has been a long-time student of yoga. And when he isn't writing or practicing yoga, he can be found examining Tibetan Buddhist traditions, sitting in ceremony with Mayan priests, and traversing caves deep in the jungle. He currently resides in Northern California. Hello, Eli, and welcome to the Pathway Show.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Now, somewhere on the internet, you describe yourself as, quote, I am an author, Mayanist, yoga teacher, dreamtime facilitator, and mystic. My aim is to bring non-duality of the heart to others for a catalyst of awakening. So I guess your aim describes why you wrote this fascinating book, to share your deep experiences and insights. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. I see a lot of division in the world, and I've witnessed it, and I've been to places where people deemed as inferior, or I've been around other cultures that are deemed as inferior, and I've spent a lot of time with women and knowing their sadness that occurs from these types of tragedies, and so I have a real place in my heart for the marginalized.
Okay. And when you say the tragedies of women, what are you referring to?
Well, I mean, I think there's and I've been part of this, but I think there's a lot of men out there who are sort of uh minimizing the beauty of women, the beauty of what they have to offer and what they've done for our culture, and more specifically, not just women, the feminine and those attributes.
Right, right. Well, we're going to get into that, and I want to hear from you on the topic of toxic masculinity. But before we do, let me ask, what was your process in writing this particular book, War in the Hearts of Men?
Well, I mean, like Quentin Tarantino, he always says he gets a title first. He knows that something's going to happen around that, and then he begins to write the story. And that's kind of how I do it. Is I was meditating and I saw this thing that said "War in the Hearts of Men." I was like, "Whoa, that's a cool title," but I had to make the title a story, and so I basically started writing down everything about sort of the illusion of different attributes within the self, feminine and masculine, and I went from there.
Okay. And how did you learn about the dynamics of the masculine and the feminine? Um, I mean, what teachings did you turn to for that?
Well, yoga talks about like Shiva and Shakti, those two energies. And
Right.
I'm a visual person, so I've seen the drawings of the serpents intertwining and up going up the spine and the chakras and things a lot of people have in yoga studios. And also I brushed up against a couple of cults that were into plant medicine, and they understood these things and would talk about them all the time. And it's kind of like going to church and you're like, wait, what are they talking about? So I wanted to know more what they meant, and so I just kind of started to study them and then realized some things about myself within that context.
Okay. Okay. So your wisdom or your vision was infused by experiences that you had with the assistance of plant medicines. And I assume, well, obviously you talk about ayahuasca in your book, and we've done a number of shows on ayahuasca, and I've taken ayahuasca many times myself. But what other plant medicines would you have you found benefit from?
Well, I mean, cannabis is good, and I've enjoyed that for a quarter century, and I just recently decided not to partake in it anymore, partially because I need to be aware for these shows, but also, it's one of those things where once I always felt like once you get the teacher's message, there's no need to continually go down that road again unless you're not healed from those messages. So I mean,
Right.
psilocybin's great. Psilocybin's a great reset. Um, and LSA, LSD, all those things are great, but they're tools and they're micro tools. And I love that people are microdosing now instead of macrodosing, like the
Yeah.
the big doses.
Right. Right. Now, you know, I described your ideas a little bit in the introduction, but what would you say is there an essential message of your book? And if so, how would you characterize that?
Yeah, well, the essential message is metaphorical, and I use the backdrop of the concept of the Maya, which is the Mayan people in Central America. I use the word Maya, which means in Sanskrit the illusion, and the illusion and like illusionary principles behind these two traits of masculine and feminine attributes. So these two traits, there's you're guaranteed to have something off, right? And there's something about the way you interact with your mother, your father, other sexes, these kind of things. So really, it's about a war within the heart of the self and how it projects outward in the world, and where we individually do it and how we've collectively done it over large periods of time.
See. And what audience did you have in mind when you were writing this book, or were you just writing it for yourself in the beginning?
Um, yeah, I mean, I go to a lot of book conferences and I go to writers conferences, and they talk about having an audience, and I always felt that it wasn't important who the audience was, but I did feel that it was anyone who was affected by war, but I had war as a grand scale of things or time, because war could be, how you are out of balance with those masculine feminine traits, or ultimately war when we bomb the Japanese, just the different scales of that. So anyone who's been affected by it, and ultimately this book brought up the fact that I had PTSD from military service, although I never went to war technically. Um, it greatly affected me, and so it's like how when you're affected by something, how do you interact with people, and how does your nervous system respond?
And so what possessed you? What made you decide to join the army?
Um, I was I was growing up in a small town, 200 people in Northwest Washington, and you could be a farmer or a logger, and I didn't want to be either. And I saw just the ignorance, and I thought the world's big, and also I like when people join like the Peace Corps or Greenpeace or something like that, where they're like, I want to make a difference. I thought that by joining the army, I saw Newsweek, a upper torso of a soldier from Somalia, that Black Hawk Down situation. He was being drugged through the streets, this soldier, this US soldier, and I thought, I got to make a difference. And literally I walked to the recruiter and said, at the lunch hall after going through the library, looking at the Newsweek magazine, and said, "Sign me up."
Wow. And how was that? How long were you in the army?
It's just a brief period of time. I graduated when I was 17, and I was honorably discharged at 20, like the bio says. And I was a paratrooper. I went to Saudi Arabia. I was an infantry paratrooper in the 82nd
I
Airborne.
see.
Yeah.
And what was it about your experience in the army that was traumatic for you?
Well, I mean, ultimately, without being candid, is I saw a couple dead bodies. One of them was someone who jumped out of a plane, and they cut him loose, and I saw his body on the ground after I landed. And another was someone who got shot by a machine gun. They were supposed to shift fire, and it was ultimately the general's fault. And so and things like that, and then also getting beat up by my whole platoon is just ways that I interacted with men my whole life, or the masculine, and how I felt threatened all the time with the littlest things, and realized my role in it all.
Well, I would say that incident where you got beat up. Can you describe that to us? It's in the book, and it's enough to traumatize the reader almost. So why don't you share that story?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like I'm talking about some character, right? It was so long ago, but ultimately it affected
That's
me.
fine. Hmm.
But yeah, I got to my duty station, they call it in the army, and it's the barracks, and it's the 3-story thing in a big hallway, and everyone's there and cleaning their weapons, and I'm just observing everyone, but realizing that these guys are like not in very good shape. They're supposed to be infantry soldiers. They're not really what I expected. I thought, wow, it's kind of like a ragtag platoon or something, of soldiers. And so I
Uh-huh.
was a better soldier. I could run faster, shoot. I was a better marksman, and I could do more push-ups. They didn't like that, and they didn't like my cockiness. And so I was a cherry, and that just means a guy with a red beret that isn't shaped yet. New guy. And so they beat me up. There's 10 of them. 10 to 12. And so they came in with masks and gloves, flaming blue gloves, and started slapping my upper torso as hard as they could. And it was horrible, honestly. I mean, I thought that they were going to be my friends and I could rely on them. But just wasn't the case.
And then I think that you were asked to you did something that might be classified as an artifact of toxic masculinity, in the sense that when you were asked what happened, what did you what did you say? How did you deal with that? With the
Yeah, I told him nothing because I mean, in a split second, I thought if I bust these guys for what they did, then they're gonna hate me. If I gotta go to war, they're gonna ultimately shoot me. I saw the movie Platoon when the guy gets shot. He's a good soldier. I thought his name was actually Elias. It was funny, but yeah, so I was like, I don't want to do this. I'm gonna shut up and I'm gonna take it, and I'm gonna be like the rest of them and just fall in line, because if I don't, then ultimately I'll have issues with the whole time, the rest of my enlistment.
and you said to the commanding officer, I fell off of my bunk or something like that. And
Yeah, and
of
there was
course he
dozens of handprints, you know, bruise
right, you
shades.
had bruises, and yeah. So it was he asked you to take off. Obvious that a lot more had happened, but you refused to recant your alibi, which you were covering up for all these other guys, hoping that that would stand you in good stead with them. Well, is that the result? It wasn't clear to me. Did they? Did the other guys? Was that an initiation that? I mean, you got demoted as a result of lying to the commanding officer. You took a personal hit in terms of your status or whatever. I'm not sure what the ramifications of that were at the time, but did it really have the result of bonding these other guys with you and creating that sort of a more trustworthy framework for you?
No, I mean, it just kept it cordial, honestly. And I look back on it and I realized I would go down the hall to the other platoons. My best friends that I kept in contact with were guys in other platoons. And
Uh-huh.
those guys had their group of friends. They didn't need me. just they tolerated me and they liked me because I was a good soldier after that, and I shut up.
Right. And they, yeah, okay. And so do you think that incident was a major factor in the development of your PTSD?
Yeah, because every time I turned around, I felt taken advantage of by men every time, for 25 years.
Right. Okay. And so how does this correlate with your definition, or what would be your definition of toxic masculinity?
Well, that's a title that they kind of put on me with that, and I do agree with it, and I do like it, but um, I would I would just I would say
So
that
that
it's go ahead.
that's something the publishers tacked on to the outside of the book or something.
Yeah, or the Joseph Campbell curator, he put that in the after he read it.
I see.
Um, but I do believe in that it is toxic the way the masculine interacts. I just think that sometimes it's a little harsh the way it's put on people because it doesn't allow them for change.
Right.
There's it's delicate, it's subtle, but I mean, yeah, uh, you everyone just shut up. Everyone, it's getting beat up, getting raped. Sweep it under the rug, don't talk about it, and then it happens on a larger scale too. And
So
with
what
country.
would you think? I'd be curious to know what you think. And this is a innocent question. Is that what do you think? How would you differentiate the masculine and the feminine? What, you know, what defines them as distinct?
Well, I mean, we have a function of procreation and we have biology, and so the masculine is penetrating and but also grounded and wants to support the opening of the feminine, and the feminine is nurturing and respectful and could can trust and open to something bigger and be creative. And the masculine builds, build monuments, we build houses, and
Right.
save.
So would you say that it becomes toxic when it doesn't create a safe environment for the unfolding or the opening of the natural tendency of the feminine to open and be receptive and nurturing?
Yeah, because most women or most people who are really feminine, they want to do what's right for everyone. And you look at the toxic masculinity, it would be defined as something, well, I built this city and, never mind God or never mind creation. I built it and it's going to stay like this, and we're going to build more no matter what, and everyone
Right.
better or else.
Your book reveals that you have quite a wide ranging grasp of history. And I particularly appreciated the analysis of the impact of the agricultural revolution on society. And I've given a lot of thought and study to that also. And it seems to me that coincides with the advent of toxic masculinity. Because as you point out, and as I've pointed out before, what happened was when we were nomads, there was a lot of equality between the masculine and the feminine. In fact, the gatherers produced a lot more of the sustenance, and they invented language and blah blah blah, and the hunters were not all that successful, but it was nice when they scored. But and then when we learned how to grow things and we settled into settlements and villages where we didn't move, a brand new concept was invented, the concept of private property, which had,
Mhm.
as far as we know, because it's prehistory, but as far as we know, it never existed before. If you invented something that was good for the tribe and you didn't share it, they're going to kick you out and you're going to die. But in the agricultural thing, you had to stick up for, well, this is my share of the grain to get through the winter. This is my shit. This is your stuff. You know, I got to take care of my stuff. You got to take care of your stuff. I'm going to need some weapons to protect against people pillaging my stuff. Oh, and by the way, I also need to protect the women and children. I got to protect my woman. Women became property. That's what that's the way I look at it. And this invention of private property gave rise to the 1%, gave rise to toxic masculinity. That first jerk, that first Donald Trump who climbed a hill and he said, and he's got his men and he goes, I'm here to announce that this is my land. And if anybody wants to argue with that, they're going to have to deal with my men. That was the rise of the 1% and the ultimate in toxic masculinity. Does that accord with what your studies have shown?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely resonates if you look back to Egypt and when I can't think of the right ruler, but when it shows him with the hook and he's, hooking anyone who disagrees about the grain and all this, and then the womb is of a woman is usurped. She doesn't get to choose who she chooses. She doesn't get to choose her partner. She doesn't get to choose what
Right.
children she's literally sold off by her dad to other neighboring societies so they can cement some agreement or trade route, and they become vessels for not for creation but vessels for agriculture and war.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, it's amazing. Um, Now, why did you use the Mayan cosmology and story as a backdrop? What drew you into that?
Well, I was 2012. I love prophecies because my name's Elijah and I studied the Bible when I was a kid. And so I thought, whoa, interesting prophecy. What's this about? And so I just wanted to study that because I've been to a few pyramids before and I realized that they were talking about the shift in perspective in that 0 point in 2012. And
Hmm.
I on the calendar more and the glyphs and all these things. And I realized, oh, these are people who are predicting the change of a world. And I thought, wow, how could they do that with such rudimentary skills living that close to the earth? And that fascinated me. And then I was into yoga, and when I went to those sites I felt the energy, how they described kundalini energy. I felt some natural force that it was powerful, and I fell in love with the culture, honestly. And I thought the cosmology is really succinct, with every cosmology around the world, and mostly specifically in Egypt, the plateau of Giza.
Right, right. No, that's fascinating. In your, and I like your reflections on business too. You say, quote, I learned several times during my life that large white men can do what they want in business. Business is the modern day version of violent slavery. Wow. So, I mean, does that kind of summarize the entire economy or what? I mean, are you talking about every wage earner or what do you mean specifically?
I mean, people with large stacks of cash. I mean, people with large plots of real estate or cars or houses, um, and with powerful. I like cross the line. What are you going to do about it? Or they stand behind a lawyer, or they stand behind the black market and say, "Well,
Right.
what black market? What are you going to do? Kill me?" And those people will grab 500,000 in cash from you if that's their thing. So these kind of people don't deserve uh well, they deserve what they get. I shouldn't say what they deserve, but I would just say that um anyone can take anything by force. And being in the army, I learned how to fight with my hands. I could kill someone in an instant, right? But why would I? Because I have ethics and morals. But some people just stand behind their power and use violence passively, and that's what really got to me over the years, I'd say.
So how can our world culture transform? I mean, what do you see as the steps that could bring us into alignment with a world that's peaceful and more collaborative?
Well, I mean, listen to the feminine, and that I talk about treating the earth as if she's your mother, giving her a name as she, as opposed to it. It's like some foreign object, but everything that we have is because of the earth. All of our resources and all of our societies. And so imagine if we treated the earth like we treated our mother. That would be one step, but also the initiation of men these days, or boys, into being men. And I know it's controversial because there's transgender and everything, and it's hard to classify anything these days, but we come from a different generation too, where it wasn't like that. So, but the people who do identify as male, and those ones are going to be not very well off if they have fathers who weren't respectful of women, fathers who weren't respectful of the earth, and fathers who aren't willing to show them what doing the right thing means. So the initiation of boys into men would be a very good thing, I think, in our schools.
Have you thought about writing a book about that? That seems to be a real need in the world.
I'm writing sci-fi next, and I'm working on it now. But
Well,
I think, yeah, I think maybe Iron John is a good book. I've been reading that. It's a pretty good
right,
book.
right, right. Oh yeah, I remember reading that. Hey, well, listen, there's so much more we could explore, but we've basically run out of time on this short little show. And I want to just say thank you so much for being with us. I mean, it went by so fast, and there's so many other things that we could talk about that are in your book that are really interesting and fascinating stuff. And so please keep up the good work. Sci-fi can be a very educational thing for people. It's a nice platform. But anyway, thanks a lot for being on the show, Eli.
Thanks for having me, Paul. It was fun.
And I want to make sure that we tell our listeners about your website, which is www.elicoberly.com. And that's spelled ELICOBERLY.com. Now, for those who may have tuned into Pathways late, this is your host, Paul O'Brien, author of Intuitive Intelligence, a book that shares the theme of Pathways, which is personal development and cultural evolution. Now, don't worry, you can play and or share this interview whenever you want via the internet or as a free podcast, and I'll tell you how in a minute. Today, we've been visiting with Eli Coberly, author of the book, War in the Hearts of Men. And I want to say thank you to all of our listeners for tuning into Pathways, which is broadcast and streamed on the internet at www.kboo.fm every Sunday morning by Donald Altman or myself at 8:30 USA Pacific time. And even better, podcasts of today's show, which you can listen to and forward to others, are available for free at divination.com. That's DIVI nation.com, as well as via iTunes, Paulo's YouTube channel, and other free podcast servers. This is Paul O'Brien reminding you to tell your friends about Pathways Radio and podcasts. And thanks again to Eli Coberly and to all of you listeners for tuning in and being a part of the Pathways conversation.